Hello. I wanted to read a little bit out of Goethe's Worldview, a book by Rudolf Steiner. So yeah, I thought I would read just a couple of chapters which are to do with both Goethe's worldview and its relationship with Platonism. So this is chapter 1, Goethe's place in the development of Western thought. Goethe and Schiller is the subtitle. Goethe tells of a conversation that once unfolded between Schiller and himself, after both had attended a meeting of the Society of Natural Research in Jena. Schiller showed himself little satisfaction with what had been presented in the meeting. A fragmented way of looking at nature had met him there, and he remarked that such a way could not appeal at all to laymen. Goethe replied that it would perhaps remain strange even to the initiated themselves, and that there could be still another way of presenting nature, not as something separated and isolated, but rather as working and alive, as striving from the whole into the parts. So nature as something working and alive, nature as something striving from the whole into the parts. And now Goethe developed the great ideas which had arisen in him about the nature of the plants. He sketched, quote, with many a characteristic pen stroke, a symbolic plant, end quote, before Schiller's eyes. This symbolic plant was meant to express the being that lives in every individual plant, no matter what particular forms the plant might assume. It was meant to show the successive becoming of the individual plant parts, their emerging from each other, and their relatedness to each other. About this symbolic plant shape, Goethe, on April 17, 1787, wrote down the words, quote, "There must, after all, be such a one. How would I otherwise know that this or that formation is a plant, if they were not all formed according to the same model?" End quote. Goethe had developed within him the mental picture of a malleable ideal form which reveals itself to the spirit, to the mind, when it looks out over the manifoldness of plant shapes and is attentive to what they have in common. Schiller contemplated this formation, which supposedly lived not in one single plant but rather in all plants, and said, shaking his head, quote, "That is not an experience, that is an idea." End quote. These words appeared to Goethe as though coming from a foreign world. He was conscious of the fact that he had arrived at his symbolic shape through the same kind of naive perception as the mental picture of a thing which one can see with one's eyes and grasp with one's hands. Like the individual plant, the symbolic or archetypal plant was for him, for Goethe, an objective being. He believed he had not arbitrary speculation, but rather unbiased observation to thank for the archetypal plant. He could not respond with anything other than, quote, "I can be very glad, then, when I have ideas without knowing it, and in fact even see them with my eyes," end quote. And he was extremely unhappy as Schiller rejoined with the words, quote, "How can an experience ever be given that could be considered to correspond to an idea? For the characteristic nature of the idea consists in the fact that no experience could ever coincide with it." End quote. That was Schiller's response. Two opposing views confronted each other in this conversation. Goethe sees in the idea of a thing an element that is immediately present within the thing, working and creating in it. In Goethe's view, an individual thing takes on particular forms, because the idea must, in a given case, live itself out in a specific way. It makes no sense to Goethe to say that a thing does not correspond to the idea. For the thing cannot be anything else than that into which the idea has made it. Schiller thinks otherwise. For him the world of ideas and the world of experience are two separate realms. To experience belong the manifold things and events which fill space and time. Confronting it, there stands the realm of ideas as a different constituted reality of which reason takes possession. Because man's knowledge flows to him from two sides, from without through observation and from within through thinking, Schiller distinguishes two sources of knowledge. For Goethe there is only one source of knowledge, the world of experience, in which the world of ideas is included. For him it is impossible to say, quote, experience and idea, end quote, because to him the idea lies through spiritual experience, through inner experience, before the spiritual or inner eye, in the same way that the sense world lies before the physical eye. Schiller's view came from the philosophy of his time. One must seek in Greek antiquity for the underlying mental pictures which have given this philosophy its stamp, and which have become driving forces of our entire Western spiritual development. One can gain a picture of the particular nature of the Goethean worldview if one tries in a certain way, with ideas which one borrows solely from it, to characterize this worldview entirely out of it itself. This is to be striven for in the later parts of this book. Such a characterization can be aided, however, by taking a preliminary look at the fact that Goethe expressed himself about certain things in this or that way because he felt himself to be in agreement with, or in opposition to, what others thought about some region of natural or spiritual life. Many a statement of Goethe's becomes comprehensible only when one looks at the ways of picturing things which he found confronting him and with which he came to terms in order to gain his own point of view. How he thought and felt about this or that gives insight at the same time into the nature of his own world view. If one wants to speak about this region of Goethe's being, one must bring to expression much that for him remained only unconscious feeling. In the conversation with Schiller described here, there stood before Goethe's spiritual eye a world view antithetical to his own. And this antithesis shows how he felt about that way of picturing things which originated from one aspect of Hellenism, sees an abyss between sense experience and spiritual experience, and how he, without any such abyss, saw the experience of the senses and the experience of the spirit, of the mind, unite in a world picture which communicated reality to him. If one wants to bring to life consciously within oneself, as thought, what Goethe carried within him more or less unconsciously as his view about the form of Western world views, then these thoughts would be the following ones. In a fateful moment, these are the thoughts, in a fateful moment, a mistrust of the human sense organs took possession of a Greek thinker. He began to believe that these organs do not transmit the truth, but rather that they deceive him. He lost his trust in what naive, unbiased observation offers. He found that thinking makes different statements about the true being of things than experience does. It would be difficult to say in whose head this mistrust first established itself. One encounters it in the Eleatic school of philosophers, whose first representative was Zenophanes, born about 570 BC in Colophon. Parmenides appears as the most important personality of this school, for he has maintained, with a keenness like none before him, that there are two sources of human knowledge. He declared that our sense impressions are delusion and error, and that man can attain knowledge of what is true only through pure thinking, which takes no account of experience. Through the way this conception of thinking and of sense experience arose with Parmenides, there was instilled into many following philosophers a developmental illness from which scientific endeavours still suffer today. To discuss the origin in Oriental views of this way of picturing things is out of place within the framework of the Goethean worldview. That's the end of chapter 1. This is now chapter 2, the Platonic worldview. With the admirable boldness characteristic of him, Plato expressed this mistrust of experience. The things of this world, which our senses perceive, have no true being at all. They are always becoming, but never are. They have only a relative existence. They are, in their totality, only in and through their relationship to each other. One can therefore just as well call their whole existence a non-existence. They are consequently also not objects of any actual knowledge. For only about what is in and for itself, and always in the same way, can there be such knowledge. They, on the other hand, are only the object of what we, through sensation, take them to be. As long as we are limited only to our perception of them, we are like people who sit in a dark cave, so firmly bound that they cannot even turn their heads, and who see nothing except, on the wall facing them, by the light of a fire burning behind them, the shadow images of real things, which are led across between them and the fire, and who in fact also see of each other, yes, each of himself, only the shadows on that wall. Their wisdom, however, would be to predict the sequence of those shadows, which they have learned to know from experience. The Platonic view tears the picture of the world whole into two parts. Into the mental picture of a seeming world, and into a world of ideas, to which alone true eternal reality is thought to correspond. Quote, "What alone can be called truly existing, because they always are, but never become nor pass away, are the ideal archetypal images of those shadow images, are the eternal ideas, the archetypal forms of all things. To them no multiplicity can be ascribed, for each is by its very nature only one, insofar as it is the archetypal picture itself, whose copies or shadows are all the single transitory things which bear the same name and are of the same kind. To them can also be ascribed no arising and passing away. To the archetypal forms can be ascribed no arising and no passing away. For they are truly existing, never becoming, however, nor perishing like their copies which vanish away. Of them alone, therefore, is their actual knowledge, since only that can be the object of such knowledge which always and in every aspect is, not that which is." Wow, that's a bad sentence. Of them alone, therefore, is their actual knowledge, since only that can be the object of such knowledge which always and in every respect is, not that which is, but then again is not, depending on how one looks at it. End quote. That's impenetrable. Anyway, apart from that sentence, I think we're getting the gist of what Steiner's saying. Steiner's response to the Platonic worldview is this: the separation of idea and perception is justified only when one speaks of how human knowledge comes about. The human being must allow things to speak to him in a twofold way. They tell him one part of their being of their own free will. He need only listen to them. This is the part of reality that is free of ideas. This, in Steiner's philosophic language, this would be the percept, or the given. The other part, however, he must coax from them. He must bring his thinking into movement, and then his inner life fills with the ideas of things. Within the inner life of the personality is the stage upon which things also reveal their ideal inner life. There they speak out what remains eternally hidden to outer perception. The being of nature breaks here into speech. This is lovely. The being of nature breaks here into speech. But it is only due to our human organization that things must become known through the sounding together of two tones. In nature, one stimulator is there that brings forth both tones. The unbiased person listens to their consonants. He recognizes in the ideal language of his own inner life the statements which things allow to come to him. Only someone who has lost his impartiality will interpret the matter differently. To this somebody, the belief is that the language of his inner life comes out of a different realm from the language of outer perception. Plato became conscious of what weight the fact has for man's worldview that the world reveals itself to the human being from two sides. Out of his insightful valuation of this fact, he recognized that reality cannot be attributed to the sense world regarded only by itself. Only when the world of ideas lights up out of his soul life, and man in looking at the world can place before his spirit idea and sense observation as a unified knowledge experience, does he have true reality before him. What sense observation has before itself, without its being shone through by the light of ideas, is a world of semblance. Regarded in this way, light is also shed by Plato's insight upon the view of Parmenides as to the deceptive nature of sense-perceptible things. And one can say that the philosophy of Plato is one of the most sublime edifices of thought that has ever sprung from the spirit of mankind. Platonism is the conviction that the goal of all striving for knowledge must be to acquire the ideas which carry the world and which constitute its foundation. Whoever cannot awaken this conviction within himself does not understand the Platonic worldview. However, insofar as Platonism has taken hold in the evolution of Western thought, it shows still another side. Plato did not stop short at emphasizing the knowledge that, in human perception, the sense world becomes a mere semblance if the light of the world of ideas is not shone upon it. But rather, through the way he presented this fact, he furthered the belief that the sense world, in and for itself, irrespective of man, is a world of semblance, and that true reality is to be found only in ideas. Out of this belief there arises the question: how do idea and sense world, parenthesis nature, come together? That is, how do idea and nature come together outside the human being? For someone who, outside of man, can acknowledge no sense world devoid of ideas, the question about the relationship of idea and sense world is one which must be sought and solved within the being of man. And this is how the matter stands for the Goethean worldview. For the Goethean worldview, the question, quote, what relationship exists outside of man between idea and sense world, end quote, is an unhealthy question. Because for it, there is no sense world, that is nature, without idea, outside of man. So in other words, outside of man, there is no nature independent of the idea. Only man can detach the idea from the sense world for himself, and thus picture nature to be devoid of idea. Therefore one can say, for the Goethean worldview, the question, quote, how do idea and sense-perceptible things come together, end quote, which has occupied the evolution of Western thought for centuries, is an entirely superfluous question. And the results of this stream of Platonism, running through the evolution of Western thought, which confronted Goethe, for example, in the above conversation with Schiller, but also in other cases, worked upon his feelings like an unhealthy element in man's way of picturing things. Something he did not express clearly in words, but which lived in his feelings and became an impulse that helped shape his own worldview, is the view that what healthy human feeling teaches us at every moment, namely, how the language of observation and that of thinking unite in order to reveal full reality, was not heeded by the thinkers sunk in their reflections. Instead of looking at how nature speaks to man, they fashioned artificial concepts about the relationship of the world of ideas to experience. So they fashioned ideas about the relationship of ideas with and experience. In order to see the full extent of the deep significance of this direction of thought, which Goethe felt to be unhealthy, within the worldviews confronting him and by which he wanted to orientate himself, one must consider how the stream of Platonism just indicated, which evaporates the sense world into a mere semblance and which thereby brings the world of ideas into a distorted relationship to it, one must consider how this Platonism has grown stronger through a one-sided philosophical apprehension of Christian truth in the course of the evolution of Western thought. Because the Christian view confronted Goethe as connected with the stream of Platonism which he felt to be unhealthy, he could only with difficulty develop a relationship with Christianity. Goethe did not follow in detail how the stream of Platonism, which he rejected, worked on in the evolution of Christian thought, but he did feel the results of it working on within the ways of thinking which confronted him. Therefore, a study of how these results came to be in these ways of thinking which developed through the centuries before Goethe came on the scene will shed light on how Goethe's way of picturing things took shape. The Christian evolution of thought, in many of its representatives, sought to come to terms with belief in the beyond and with the value that sense existence has in the face of the spiritual world. If one surrendered oneself to the view that the relationship of the sense world to the world of ideas has a significance apart from man, then, which is antithetical to the Goethean worldview, then with the question arising from this, one came into the view of a divine world order. And the Church Fathers, to whom this question came, had to form thoughts for themselves as to the role played by the Platonic world of ideas within this divine world order. One not only stood in danger thereby of thinking that what unite in human knowing through direct perception, namely idea and sense world, are separated off by themselves outside of man, but also one stood in danger of separating them from each other so that ideas outside of what is given to man as nature now also lead an existence for themselves within a spirituality separated from nature. If one joined this mental picture, which rested on an untrue view of the world of ideas and of the sense world, with the justified view that the divine can never be present in the human soul in full consciousness, then a total tearing apart of the world of ideas and nature resulted. Then one seeks what always should be sought within the human spirit, outside it, within the created world. The archetypal images of all things begin to be thought of as contained within the divine spirit. The world becomes the imperfect reflection of the perfect world of ideas resting in God. The human soul then, as the result of a one-sided apprehension of Platonism, becomes separated from the relationship of idea and reality. The soul extends what it justifiably thinks to be its relationship to the divine world order out over the relationship which lives in it between the world of ideas and the seeming world of the senses. One is reminded at this point, one can't help thinking of Owen Barfield's statement, we will never be able to save souls without saving the appearances. I think this passage up till here can throw some light on what Owen Barfield meant by that statement. Augustine comes, through a way of looking at things such as this, to views like the following, quote, "Without wavering we want to believe that the thinking soul is not of the same nature as God, for God allows no community, but that the soul can, however, become enlightened through taking part in the nature of God." End quote. In this way, then, when this way of picturing things is one-sidedly overdone, the possibility is taken away from the human soul of experiencing, in its contemplation of nature, also the world of ideas as the being of reality. And experiencing the ideas is also interpreted as un-Christian. The one-sided view of Platonism is extended over Christianity itself. Platonism, as a philosophical worldview, stays more in the element of thinking. Religious sentiment immerses thinking into the life of feeling and establishes it in this way within man's nature. Anchored this way within man's soul life, the unhealthy element of one-sided Platonism could gain a deeper significance in the evolution of Western thought than if it had remained mere philosophy. For centuries this development of thought stood before questions like these. How does what man forms as ideas stand with respect to the things of reality? Are the concepts that live in the human soul through the world of ideas only mental pictures, that is, names, which have nothing to do with reality? Are they themselves something real which man receives through perceiving reality and through grasping it with his intellect? Such questions, for the Goethean worldview, are not intellectual questions about something or other lying outside of man's being. Within human contemplation of reality, these questions solve themselves with inexhaustible liveliness through true human knowing. And this Goethean worldview must not only find that within Christian thoughts there live the result of a one-sided Platonism, but it feels itself estranged from genuine Christianity when the latter confronts him permeated with such Platonism. What lives in many of the thoughts which Goethe developed within himself in order to make the world comprehensible to himself was rejected of that stream of Platonism which he experienced as unhealthy. The fact that, besides this, he had an open sense for the Platonic lifting of the human soul up to the world of ideas is attested to by many a statement made in this direction. He felt within himself the active working of the reality of ideas when, in his way, he approached nature through contemplation and research. He felt that nature itself spoke in the language of ideas when the soul opens itself to such language. But Goethe could not agree that one regard the world of ideas as something isolated and thus create for oneself the possibility, with respect to an idea about the nature of plants, of saying, quote, "That is no experience, that is an idea," end quote. He felt there that his inner eye beheld the idea as a reality, just as the physical eye sees the physical part of the plant being. Thus, that Platonism which is directed into the world of ideas established itself in all its purity in Goethe's worldview. And the stream of Platonism that leads away from reality is overcome in it. Because his worldview took this form, Goethe had also to reject what presented itself to him as Christian views, in such a way that it could only appear to him to be transformed, one-sided Platonism. And he had to feel that, in the forms of many a world-view which confronted him and with which he wanted to come to terms, one had not succeeded in overcoming within Western culture the Christian Platonic view of reality, which was not in accordance with nature nor with ideas. Thanks for watching. That's the end of this reading. I hope that has whet your appetite to perhaps go out and purchase the book. I strongly recommend it. Okay, bye.